when we were going through our ordeal, which lasted about 4 years, the people around us, depending on who they were, if they had greater wisdom, they were able to be emotionally supportive. They had lesser wisdom, they pitied us. And the pity was written all over their faces because from their point of view, our life was a living hell. But you know what? Every single day we got up in the morning, we went to work, we played with our children, we visited Menachem. There was so much meaning and positivity in those 4 years. When you go through an ordeal, if you go through it correctly, you live it. And you cry and you suffer pain, but you also laugh and you also experience life.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest. His name is Rabbi Yossi Paltiel. Rabbi Paltiel is a scholar, a mentor, a teacher of Chasidic philosophy to many, and he is also the founder of Chasidic.org. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Paltiel.
Pleasure's all mine. Good evening.
Good evening. So tell us, first of all, a little about yourself, a little about your background, and what is it that made you who you are today, this big mentor and big teacher of Hasidic philosophy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to believe that the day I become a big mentor, I'm no longer a mentor. We're all works in progress.
Right.
First of all, I grew up in Crown Heights. I grew up at the Rebbe's feet. I was very, very fortunate. I was born in 1965, and my life is influenced incredibly by the Rebbe, both as a child and as a young man, and even as a married man. The Rebbe's influence created me, gave me direction, it gave me an understanding of purpose, and probably more than anything else, a sense of duty, a sense of what Chabad knows as a foundational idea, that we're here to serve. Our Hasidus is defined not by our relationship with God, but by our ability to bring others closer to God as well. I just want to say one thing in addition, which I think is interesting. For me, it's important. My father was born in 1938 in Moscow, and he went through the war in Siberia. He lost his mother at the age of 2, never knew his mother.
Oh, wow.
And he's one of the people from that generation that the very fact that they had normal lives is so extraordinary. Talk about extraordinary people. It's such a miracle. Is beyond anybody's fathoming. And I believe that there's no question that my father and his siblings, his brother and his sister, Aleichem Hashalom, may they rest in peace, would not have a life had it not been for the involvement of the Rebbe in their lives, which was very personal, very personal. I just want to say one thing about my father. My father's alive and well, thank God. My father's one of those people who had to figure out many things that most people take for granted, including parenting, because he didn't have a normal childhood. He didn't have a childhood. He literally did not have a childhood. Right. And he's very intelligent and he's very independent. And when I think about him in hindsight, he's a man who literally figured out the kind of things that most people don't think about, including how he was going to raise his children. And we are products of such a person. He thought through everything, decided how it's supposed to be, and then did it. And there are so many examples in my life where I see that, having to figure everything out is very difficult, and how to figure it out correctly is almost impossible. So there's a combination of,
especially in parenting, which is so intuitive, where you're just acting. Yeah.
Right. So there's aspects of it that you could see clearly. This is what happens to a person who's thinking it through intellectually rather than doing it intuitively. But on the other hand, because of that, he was an extraordinary parent. My parents, both of them, but my mother was born in the United States. She doesn't have his background. My mother grew up in, quote, a normal home. And I think all of my siblings are the products of that. My father is a very hardworking person. My father is a very principled person. And to whatever extent you could say that the children follow in the footsteps of the parents, I don't think we're as good as my parents. I don't think any of us would think that. But we're certainly products of a human being who had to work a lot harder than most people to figure out simple things. And I think in the end, we're better for it. And I want to say this because to me, it's important.
Interesting. Did you ever feel that, because of the trauma that he went through, it was hard for him to parent and understand what you're going through?
The understanding part is a very interesting question, but I'm not talking about the understanding part. I'm talking about the instruction part. The
Mm-hmm.
understanding part is, I think, is complicated and dynamic, but the raising us, teaching us how to be people, teaching us how to be Jews, he did incredibly well, incredibly well. And I think he understood us quite well. How could a person who had the childhood that he had understand what we have? Our
Right.
laziness and our material indulgence. These were
Mm-hmm.
things, he knew hunger. He knew what it means not to have food. He knew what it means to be really cold. And above all else, he knew what it meant to be really afraid. I mean, he grew up in
Right.
Stalinist Russia. So I think it took a lot of patience on his part to appreciate the fact that American-born children are going to be in a different place than he was. And I think he was good at it. But like
Mm-hmm.
you said, it was never intuitive. It was always learned.
Mm-hmm. And also, he didn't have a mother. You're saying, so that's a big.
His father remarried when he was 12, and she was, I
Uh,
think, to a great extent, a mother for him. But that's true also, right? That's a very significant part of who he was and is.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know when my mother tells me stories from Russia. I mean, she was also born in that. It was just a different world, just a different world than what we have today. So it was just so different in every single way. The life that they led, the fear that they had, the commitment, the devotion.
Right, right. And the
Yeah,
uncertainty. You had no
the
idea what
uncertainty.
tomorrow was going to bring. There was no such thing as normal.
Right, 100%. Right. So you feel that shaped you in becoming who you became. When did you decide to start teaching Hasidic philosophy on the level that you do?
Well, the truth is that my father has a huge influence in that as well. I think it's very important to appreciate that. I think the greatest influence in my life is the Rebbe, but my father molded me. My father was my personal teacher. My father, for whatever reasons, did not have the opportunity. He should have been what I am. He should have been that teacher. He should have been teaching Hasidus because he really is a master. For various reasons, he ended up he was a professional. He didn't teach Hasidus as his life's work. And I don't really tell this to people, but I sort of feel like what he didn't do, I'm doing.
Mm,
The Rebbe told my father two things. This is very personal. I've never shared this. The Rebbe told my father that it says in Hayom Yom, which is a book that gives a daily instruction for each day of the year, that in one of the entries it speaks about a person who could bake bread or string pearls. That if a person could string pearls and they spend their time baking bread, then they're wasting themselves. Although bread is a
mhm,
staple, you can't live without it, and pearls are a luxury, and the world can go on fine without it. But a person needs to maximize the skills and the gifts that they had. The Rebbe told this to my father, and he told it to me as a child growing up, and he was not able to do it. So I can't say this is why I did it, but my
mm,
aspiration to teach Hasidus goes back to way before I was married. I was going to do this, period. And the second thing that I
mhm,
ever told my father, which again, I don't think he was able to do completely, was Vishinantam Levanech Elu Atalmidim. That it says in the Talmud, and it's brought in the Rambam that we just studied a few days ago, that you have to teach Torah to your children, and your children means every Jew in the world. So I,
mm,
I was going to teach Hasidus in one capacity or another, probably from the time I was an adolescent.
mhm. Did that put a lot of pressure on you?
No,
That you had to fill your father's big footsteps?
I never saw it that way. I just saw it
Mhm,
as my mission, as my purpose. Um,
mhm,
I've been very fortunate. My life has come to me rather than me going to my life over and over and over again. Opportunities knocked, and I took them. I started out as a
mhm,
simple teacher in a small yeshiva, And over the last 35 years, I've been given opportunities to reach so many people. And I've been fortunate enough to have a supporting cast. I have no technical skill. People did all the technical things for me for years and years and years, literally as volunteers. We were an
Mm-hmm.
organization with no resources at all till very recently. And
Mm-hmm.
I have the good fortune to teach Chassidus to thousands of people. I mean, most of my students I don't even know.
Hmm.
So that's my
What,
story. I started out teaching Chassidus, and then the Eibishter God Almighty sent opportunities my way, and I took them.
why do you think your teachings resonate with so many people?
Oh, you have to ask them. You have to ask them.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I say that. I'm not very charismatic. I'm not likable. I don't have a likability factor. What I do have is an enormous clarity. I explain things very clearly. I try to understand things well. And I try to be direct and honest. I don't speak in riddles. I say, somebody
Right.
once told me that he calls it blunt Hasidus. I say it the way I see it.
Right.
And people want clarity. People want to understand things clearly. And I think on some level I'm able to provide that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I listened to your Tanya classes and I really, really enjoy it. And the clarity that you gave. I was listening to the different spherot of Chesed and Gvura, and it was just, it was just very clear how you explained it. So I appreciated it.
I appreciate that you
Um,
appreciate it.
yeah, no, that's really, really nice. So I know you've had challenges as well in your life. Let's talk about some loss that you've had. Can you tell us what happened with you and your wife?
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but when we were single, when I was in 770, I was a big boy. They began to do the organized genetic testing for what's called genetic recessive diseases, which is a unique category of illnesses because it's recessive, which means you have to have two genes in order to have a child with a
Mm-hmm.
particular illness. And the organization that did it, Dar Yesharim, came to 770 where I was learning in the late 80s, and they asked us to test. And I didn't test. It's very simple. Had I tested, my wife and I probably would not have gotten married because we're both carriers for a disease called Tay-Sachs, which is a terrible, terrible disease. And the children suffer incredibly, and they have a very short life expectancy, as did our son. When we got engaged, so there was a standard text that the Rebbe would write to every bride and groom on the occasion of their engagement. And for us, he added an extra word. And I've discovered that this extra word doesn't necessarily mean that it's. He wrote the word nochen. It's correct. The standard language that the Rebbe would use, it should be in a good and auspicious hour, and he's going to mention us by the resting place of the previous Rebbe. With us, he added one additional word, nochen. It's a correct shidduch. And I've since
Mm-hmm.
discovered that that word was added to people who suffered something with their children. So he was our third child. His name was Menachem, and He was born. He was born within Shloshim of the Rebbe's passing, and his bris was actually on the Shloshim. Gimel Menachem, 1994 was his bris, and he lived 5 days short of his fourth birthday. So for the first 2 years, we kept him home, and it got harder and harder to look after him. And then we put him in a facility which was near us, here in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, and we would go see him every single day. And we had two children before, and during his illness, we had two more children. Our fourth or fifth daughter, depending how you want to count it, was born a couple of months after he passed away. And
Mm-hmm.
that was an ordeal. It was an ordeal for us. It was an ordeal for our children. And it's a very, very long time ago. Most of our children were born after all of this occurred, or at least they don't have any real recollections of it. Although, interestingly, many of our children feel to have a kinship with the little baby that they never knew. It's very odd. Um, and it's just a part of who we are. It's part of it. It grew us up. It was very exhausting, and
How did it affect your relationship with your wife?
Well, we
Did
both,
you both react to the loss the same way, or was there a difference?
well, there's two parts to it. Okay, there's dealing with the challenge, and then there's dealing with the loss, and they're very
Mhm,
different.
mhm.
And I must warn you, my wife is sitting right here, so
Listening
I have to
carefully.
behave. Yes, well, there are no. This is so long ago. We've really had opportunity to work this through before, during, and after.
Right.
To my wife, she was his son, and she had to take care of him.
Mhm,
To me, it was raw pain, raw pain. And one of the hardest things when you deal with these kinds of issues is when you disagree about something fundamental, and there's just no room to compromise. There's no way to make both people happy,
mhm.
and it's torturous to deal with the reality of, quote, getting your way, or, quote, not getting your way.
Well,
So
what was it that you disagreed
I'll
about?
tell I'll tell you. The first issue
Mhm,
was, my wife wanted to keep the baby home as long as possible, and
mhm,
I would have been very happy to put the child in a facility right here in Kingsbrook Hospital. There is a ward that used to be called a Tay-Sachs ward, because Kingsbrook Hospital is a Jewish hospital, and this is a Jewish disease. Today,
mhm,
because of Dar Yesharim, which is, we should talk about that for a minute, they've
mhm,
virtually eliminated all of these genetic diseases, and thousands of families have been spared this heartache because they do this testing, and before a couple meets, they exchange numbers, and if they're not compatible, they don't meet, and they don't go through what we went through.
mhm,
So the first issue was keeping the child home, and the second issue was, once we simply could not care for him anymore. I visited him every single day. Every single day, I would go after work, 10 o'clock at night. I'd go and sit in his
mhm,
bed sometimes till midnight, and I would study. I remember they did a report on him, and they wrote 0 to 3 months intelligence. He was a 3.5-year-old. We were so insulted
mhm,
by it, but it was the fact. His
mhm.
his brain had deteriorated, and I did it because my wife wanted me to, and I did it. I did it. I did
You
it.
did what because
I
you
visited
did
him
what because
every
you're
single. My wife
oh,
wanted me every single
because she
night.
wanted you to meet.
Yeah,
Right. Wow.
and according to her, I did it with a whole heart. There was no grudge. But
Yeah.
when he passed away,
Mhm,
I was done. I had done all my mourning, and my
mhm,
wife began to mourn.
mhm.
And the way I remember it, that was probably the most difficult part of the entire ordeal. Um, we people helped us. We had some influence, but we knew instinctively, and it was something that we talked about a lot, that the most important thing through this challenge was to stay together as a couple. And when
Mhm.
I talk to people about our experience, I equate it to the axle of a wheel that has many spokes. The spokes are the children, the axle is the couple. When couples go through challenge, the nature of pain, the nature of suffering is to withdraw. I just think
Mhm.
it's not, you just withdraw. And when I think about it in hindsight, we withdrew even from from the people closest to us, the people who loved us the most, who
Right.
wanted so much to be there for us and to help us. It's very tricky to be the brother or the sister of someone who's going through this kind of a thing. But
Sure.
people withdraw, and they withdraw from one another. And
Mhm.
we knew with a certitude that the most important thing is that we have to remain together as a unit. And I think we did that very well. And it was important for Menachem, for the child who was ill, and it was important for other children.
Mhm.
I'm married 35 years, and God knows I have no complaints. Maybe it's been a
Do you
long
think
trip.
everyone withdraws? Like, I find sometimes people, like I know I always withdraw and I go inside, but I see some people, like, go out. They go out to others. They let others, help them or let others be a part of their orbit, rather than withdraw into themselves and into their own pain.
Well, I can't answer that question because I'm not an expert and I didn't study it.
Right.
But
But both of you did that.
it's
Right.
conceivable that you draw other people into your orbit from a
Mm.
distant place
Mhm.
rather than the people who are already in your orbit. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, it's possible that you look for new people to draw strength from when the first place a man should draw strength from is his wife. The first
Mm-hmm.
place a woman should draw strength from is her husband. Or to say it
Mm-hmm.
alternatively, you need to stay together as a unit. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that oftentimes couples become so estranged when they struggle like this that
Mm-hmm.
they lose their sense of intimacy, lose their sense of couplehood. It's a terrible
Right.
mistake because besides the fact that they're hurting themselves, they're hurting the people they're trying to help. And I think we knew that. We were very young. Remember, this is 30 years
Right.
ago, and
Wow. How old were you at the time?
I was just 30. I was less than
Mm-hmm.
30 when Menachem was born.
Mm-hmm.
My wife wasn't 30 when he died. We're
Wow.
little kids. We're very young, and the
And,
physical energy that it took, we could
and
never
how
do
did
it.
you cope with the fact that both of you were in different places? Like you said, after he passed away, it was over for you, but her mourning just began. So did you understand what she was going through? How did you come to you're talking about staying connected and united, but how do you do that if you're both in such different places?
Well, first of all, this is an actual story. My wife felt that we should do things a certain way, and she knew that
Mm-hmm.
I had very different feelings about it. And so she called people very close to her, very wise people, and they told her that there are certain situations that you simply can't please everybody, and you have to make one choice or another. And
Mm-hmm.
some choices were done my wife's way, some choices were done my way. They were black and white choices, which means somebody was losing. And the most important thing is to accept. You're dealing with a reality. You want something
Mm-hmm.
done a certain way, and it's impossible to make everybody happy. So instead of being miserable the whole time and saying, I told you we should have done it, each one of us accepted the place where the other person was and the decisions that we made, whether they liked them or didn't like them, completely. And
Mm-hmm.
I think after Menachem passed away, so I needed to be there for my wife, and it was very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was the hardest part of it. I don't remember, but we got through it. We're still here
Why was it the hardest part to see
because
her mourning at
because
that
I
time?
because I was exhausted. I was
Mm-hmm.
just used up.
Right.
I was
Right.
exhausted. I was used up, and she was taking care of him. Literally, even though he was
Right.
in the hospital, she was taking care of him. And now she had a loss.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. You mentioned before that had you taken that test, that Dor Yesharim test, you and your wife wouldn't be together. How do you understand that? Like if we're predestined for one another, how does that happen? Either you're soulmates or you're not soulmates. How would that have affected? And is taking a test something that stops soulmates from getting together? Like how would you explain that?
You ask me my opinion?
Yeah, your thoughts on
Perhaps. My thoughts on it are that
it.
God runs the world and God gives us tools to help us get through our lives. And we use those tools within the parameters of Torah as we're supposed to. And we
Hmm.
live our lives. I will just tell you what I know for a fact because I was involved with Dor Yesharim for many years. That when they came to Crown Heights originally, Rabbi Marlowe, Olav Hashem, who was our rabbi at the time, took the entire folder with all the details about the research and about the testing and the rest and sent it into the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe
Hmm.
the question you just asked. And I can show you a transcript of the Rebbe's own handwriting, pardon me, where the Rebbe wrote, send it back to Rabbi Marlowe. And he wrote in Hebrew, Kilakol Shaila Refuis Umanishtana, question mark, exclamation point, Asker Alatzin. Which translates in English, the Rebbe didn't understand why the rabbi even asked him. It's a medical
Hmm.
question and it should be dealt with by doctors and it's no different than any other scenario. So the Rebbe took a clear position on this. I know there are other Hasidic groups. They worry about the point you just made and they delay the testing and then they have all kinds of trouble. But Dar Sharm has a
Hmm.
policy. They don't test couples once they're engaged. And there are other
Hmm.
communities who feel like they shouldn't test prior to being engaged. But the Rebbe made it very clear that from his perspective, it was a strictly medical question, which means do what doctors say. So if a couple is destined for one another because they're soulmates and they have medical issues. So for 5,000 years, those medical issues were not discoverable. So they would get married. Now they are. So the same God who wanted them to get married and unfortunately deal with challenging children, has now arranged that you can know beforehand and make determinations that will prevent these kinds of things from happening. And
Mm-hmm.
the issue of a soulmate, which is an idea found in the Gemara, it's found in the Talmud, is coupled by the idea that we're supposed to be reasonable people and we're supposed to use our best judgment. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
decisions are made. You don't sit back, relax, and wait for God to act. That's not how He operates. We do
Mm-hmm.
everything, not something, everything in our power, and He leads us in the right direction. And any person who's honest about his life knows that God shows Himself in the areas of our life where we invested the most. In other words, when you work very hard in a particular area, using my profession as an example, God plays an enormous role in the things that you think you're using your decision power completely, and he steers the ship. That's how He operates. Hashem is in the shadows, but He's ever
Mm-hmm.
present in the shadows. So don't worry about Him. He's in charge. We're never going
Mm-hmm.
to medically exclude God from our life. It's never going to happen. He's on the ball. He's cool, and He's very passive, very quiet. The Gemara speaks about, the Talmud speaks about three sins a person commits every day, and they're not really sins; they're just omissions. And one of them is, in the language of the Talmud, is called iyun tefillah, which means to lack concentration during prayer. But there's a fascinating Rashi, that Rashi in the Gemara, in the Talmud and Tractate Brachas, translates iyun tefillah as a person who prays and he waits and watches to see how God is going to answer his prayer. It's not the way God operates. He waits for you to turn your back. You do what you have to do, but God's not playing, what's the right word? He's not playing, there's no deals with God. When you ask God for what you need, He'll give you what He thinks He should give you, and He gives you what you ask for. But you have to let it be. You have to have tamam tiyeh misham elokech. You have to be simple and sincere with God, and not calculated and reciprocal, because He doesn't operate that way. He doesn't
So
operate
there's
that way.
no making deals with God.
You are making deals with God, but it doesn't tabulate the way you would
Mm-hmm.
do something on a calculator. People could do all kinds of things, but in the end, God's relationship with us is from the perspective where we don't even see how we get what we ask for. We ask for
Mm-hmm.
something and we feel frustrated that it's not coming. And then you look back 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and it all played out exactly. He
Right.
operates in his subliminal, he operates in the shadows. That's one of his tricks. And if we sit
Mm-hmm.
around and expect it to be delivered in a certain way, it simply won't be.
Mm-hmm. Right. Did you ever, doubt? I mean, God is all good. We know, we learned that in Chassidus. Did you ever wonder, when you experienced this difficulty and your what the suffering that your child was going through, did it ever make you question how God is all good when this was happening to him?
It's hard for me to remember. I remember I spent a Shabbos with him in the hospital. We had a surgery on Friday and a surgery on Shabbos and a surgery on Shabbos night. That
Mm.
was very hectic. But I don't think that ever crossed my mind.
Wow.
And I tell this to people, and I believe this to be true. When people complain about suffering in the world, they're almost always complaining about other people's suffering, not
Mm.
their own.
So true.
Because
Yeah.
your own suffering, you're busy. You're simply
Right.
busy. You don't have time. And it's very dynamic. I'll tell it to you in a form. When we were going through our ordeal, which lasted about 4 years, the people around us, depending on who they were, if they had greater wisdom, they were able to be emotionally supportive. They had lesser wisdom, they pitied us. And the pity was
Mm.
written all over their faces, because from their point of view, our life was a living hell. But you know what? Every single day we got up in the morning, we went to work, we played with our children, we visited Menachem. There was so much meaning and positivity in those 4 years. And I think people don't realize that. When people suffer, right? And I mean, just to give you a classic example, end of life. End of life could be miserable, and end of life could be absolutely beautiful. Everybody
Mm.
dies. Some people live till 100, but they also die. The people around them could spend the last few weeks quote, waiting for them to die, or they could enjoy every moment. That's a choice. And when you go through an ordeal, if you go through it correctly, you live it. And you cry and you suffer pain, but you also laugh and you also experience life. That's the truth of a person as he or she is going through suffrage. And as an outsider, it's hard for you to appreciate how nuanced it is. But there's so much good in challenge. There's so much righteousness and kindness in challenge that it's unbelievable.
Wow.
And I'm not
Interesting.
saying
Very
that this is my
interesting.
experience. I think this is
Right.
true. I think this is true.
Right. Yeah. Rings true. Wow. And what about after? I mean, your wife was still in mourning. Was she what was that like? I mean, was her mourning because she mourned that he wasn't anymore here? She wondered where he was? Like what part of the mourning was it?
You would really have to ask her.
Mhm.
But it's loss. It's just
Right.
loss. It's loss. When you take care of a child for 4 years, you love that child so unconditionally. You're defined by that. And then when that's missing, so technically your life is easier. You have more hours in the day. You can sleep easier at night. You have more energy. But there's a loss,
Huge
a
loss for
loss.
sure.
And how do you explain the process of dealing with loss? You never fill it. The loss is never
Mhm.
replaced.
Mhm.
You just move on. There's an evolution. There's a mourning process, which is a very acute pain, and then it
Mhm.
evolves into ultimately having positive memories. But that takes time,
Right.
and everybody goes
Right.
through mourning their own way. But there's a cycle. I mean, this has been studied by many people. The
Mhm.
cycle of mourning, the cycle of loss, and when people are very young,
Right.
for example, and they don't know how to express their emotions, and they don't go through that process, they remain stuck in that space for many years. So I don't remember how long it took.
Right. How do you understand what the Rebbe wrote, Nachon? It's correct, the
Well, I
shidduch.
was very proud of that Nachan. I'll be honest with you. I thought it was a sign of an endorsement of our union that made it
Mhm.
special. And people have pointed out to me that they know of others who got that extra word that they had difficulties in their marriage.
Mhm.
The way I interpret it is that this shidduch was meant to happen from on high, which is really where all
Mhm.
unions. I mean, any person who's been married knows that as frequently as a couple joins together and gets married, every single time it's an incredible miracle.
Mhm.
And ours is also a miracle. Every minute of it, it's been a wonderful journey. But and
Right.
it's good. It's good. It's the way God wanted it.
That's good. So let's go on to your teachings of Chassidus. You know, which part of it excites you the most? If you were to take one part of it, what do you think would be the most
Okay,
exciting
so
part?
this is ironic and interesting. Um, at this point, I have a team of people who are helping me. I have a manager who makes everything happen. I have an editor who founded the website that I want to mention her name. His name is Mrs. Yocheved Seidman. She
Mm,
founded the website. It's close to 20 years ago, and it's an incredible story. She was living in Turkey, and she was doing her doctorate, and she found Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, Shalom, who had what was called Chabad in cyberspace, which is the father of
Chabad.org.
Chabad.org online.
Mhm.
And he brought her to Judaism, to Torah values, remotely. I think she flew
Mm.
into his funeral. I mean, that was the kind of relationship she had with him.
Wow.
So she was one of the early people who the internet facilitated her exposure to Jewish life and Jewish practice. And she always felt like she wanted to give something back. Now, when
Mm.
I met her, she was already married, I believe, and she came to my classes at Machon Chana. It goes back, again, 20 years, maybe 25 years. And I had a class full of girls, and I had more tape recorders than girls. I'd have 12 girls in the classroom, and I started
Right.
putting, I figured if 9 girls could put on tape recorders, maybe I should put the 10th one down. So I started recording myself probably 10 years into my teaching. And I would just save the tapes. I had no idea what was going to become of them. So she said, "Would you like to put your classes online?" I said, "Of course." So she initially took the audio cassettes and changed them to the electronic form. and she birthed Inside Chassidus. It's her credit.
Mm.
And now she edits all of my classes, and it's a labor of love for her. She's very skilled, and she's very
Mm.
smart, and we have very different backgrounds, so we are able to bounce off each other what is correct and what is incorrect, what is too provocative, what's not provocative enough. And that's how it works. And then we have a young man who does the shorts where he takes from my classes little excerpts, which I can't stand because they always make me sound like a hysterical radical, but that's what people are interested in. So
Right.
the reality is that in the last year and a half, I've gotten a larger audience because of my shorts. A lot of people listen to my stories. I have a lot of the history of Chabad. I have the biographies of each one of the Chabad Rebbes in very great detail. And there's a section on the site which is called the History of the Chabad Rebbeim. I don't know what it's called precisely, but you have a whole biography of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the Alter Rebbe, each one of the Chabad Rebbes. And a lot of people listen to my stories. And then there are a lot of people who like my Fabrengens, which means my informal talks where I talk about an event or a time. But the truth of the matter is, if I had it my way, I'd be teaching Hasidic philosophy all day long. The problem is, my audience for that is very small. The percentage of people who enjoy what I enjoy most on my website is probably 10%. So I have to balance what I love to do with what people love. People want things that are a little
What,
lighter, not that
so what
heavy.
part what part like excites you the most? What is it that you love the most?
So if you go to my
What is
website,
that 10%?
if you go to my website, I have a section called My Modim, which means Hasidic Discourses. We have by now well over 900 of our Rebbe's Maimorim recorded, edited, and posted. In the 40 years from 1951 till 1992, the Rebbe said between 15 and 1600 Hasidic discourses. We have more than half. And it's one of our challenges. We would like to complete that. It's incredibly time consuming, but that's what I love. In addition, from the fifth Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dever, called the Rebbe Rashab, whose Hasidus it's the most orderly and the most streamlined. It's the Hasidus that the boys learn in yeshiva for the most part. I have thousands of classes of his Hasidus. I have the entire Samach Vov, cover to cover, which is an essay in Hasidus, which is 800 pages long. And I have classes on each discourse that I taught it 20 years ago, and they're sitting there, and the boys in many yeshivas, and men and women who want to learn Hasidus on a more advanced level, go to my website and they take these classes. And I'm a teacher to people 15, 20 years after I gave those classes. So I have many, many of the series of the Rebbe Rashab on my website. And I've been given permission by my current employer to do the Ayin Beis, which is the most expansive series of my modem ever published. It's also extremely deep and concise. The language is far more concentrated than earlier discourses of the Fifth Rebbe. And I've been given permission that each year I can continue with my new student body from where I finished the year before. So I'll be able to
To
create
do that. Wow.
this continuum. And this is what I love. I like to
Right.
teach Chassidus. We also do now, we have what's called a glossary of Hasidic terms. I'm supposed to do one each week. They're short clips, 10 to 15 minutes, where I talk about ideas in Chassidus in alphabetical order. And we've touched on there's several hundred of them already available online. And people find them and they help people. And they're
Wow.
learning.
So you've been learning Hasidus for so many years. I mean, since you were little. How has it changed you?
I'm supposed to say immensely, right? I'm supposed to say immensely, but
I don't know what you're supposed
the
to
next
say. I'm
question is, so
curious.
where's the change?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an old
How
Hasidic
does it?
adage that if you,
And you're a scholar. You know it like so in depth. You're talking about the most profound Maimarim, that you've explained and expounded on. So you would think that really would change a person. How has it changed you?
before I answer your question, I'm going to qualify the question.
Yeah.
The previous Rebbe used to say in Yiddish, the form works better than in English. He would say, you have learned Hasidus, but what has Hasidus learned you? And in
Right.
Yiddish, the word for learning, means both acquiring the information and having the information make an impression on you. Hasidus is supposed to refine us. It's supposed to make us more in touch with spiritual things and with the ever presence of God. But it doesn't just happen from the study. You have to live a certain way for the ideas to have the impact that they're meant to have. If a person's personal life is unrefined, chronically, that's just how they live, and they happen to be bright and they study lots of chassidus, they're not going to become a better person. They'll just become a more scholarly person, which would, in a real way, defeat the purpose that the rebbes, that our rabbis had in teaching chassidus. They used to say in the old days that if a person studies chassidus and they don't pray, they don't use the chassidus in their practical life, they shouldn't study it because
Mm.
they're violating it, they're abusing it. I mean, we're living in a different time where anything good that you do is wonderful. So you study Hasidus, even if perhaps your davening, your prayer could be better. I mean, to answer your question honestly,
I mean,
Hasidus.
I would assume that someone who studies it, not just for the sake of the scholarship, but actually for the right reason, which I assume you do, it would change you.
So that's a big assumption, and I'm flattered by that assumption.
Yeah.
And the answer is I cannot say that I don't care about what I learn, but I also cannot say that I maximize what I learn in terms of how I live my life. You could always be a better person. You always be a more precise chassid.
Mhm.
The behavioral life that 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 comes before, during, and after the learning affects the degree to which the learning affects a person. But I want to answer your question directly, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
Chassidus has molded my mind. It's just on an intellectual level. Um, I feel like a lot of people study, many people study, but not that many people study to the extent that their mind is molded by their area of study. I don't know what word to use, but when a person does that, their mind becomes a very exciting tool that they can use in all the areas of life. I was fortunate. I mean, I made this my career. I made this my business. I was fortunate when I first got married. I would study day and night. And literally, that's all I did was study. For the first 15 years of my marriage, before I started my website, every free minute I was studying. And I feel like it's molded my mind. It's molded my thinking, my analytical skill, and
So
my.
in what way has it molded your mind?
I guess ultimately the right answer to that question is intellectual intuitiveness. People who know stuff but don't develop an aptitude at learning are blind. So what they know, what they don't know, they don't know. People who delve into an area of knowledge so completely that they allow that body of knowledge, doesn't matter what it is, to define them, develop a feel for it. So even what you don't know, you have a sense of. Um, and
And
I
how does that translate, like in real life?
That's a very interesting question. I'm giving you an intellectual answer, and you're asking for a
Right.
human response.
Does it make you a nicer person? Does it make you a better person?
No, no. For me to become a nicer person, a better person, I have to work on my character. And to be honest, naturally, I told you this in the very beginning, I don't have a very high likability factor. It's not my, I'm a very powerful person when you meet me. Not that I'm actually very strong, I just come across very strong. And a kid once told me, Rabbi, I loved you till I met you. He told me straight to my face. So for me to work on my character is a job, is an exercise. Um, does Hasidus inform my working on myself? Only in a general way, because Hasidus talks so much about refining the character. But refining the character is not sophisticated, and it's certainly not lofty and mystical. It's based on exercise. The person has a tendency to say the wrong thing to people. Okay, and I guess one of the best examples of that means When you don't know somebody, some people know how to say the right thing. I will usually say the wrong thing. It's just the I'm just it's my weakness. I'm an intellectual more than anything else. But
Maybe it's just a lack of awareness.
it's a lack of awareness. It's a lack of sensitivity, and it's a lack of, forgive me, it's a lack of common sense. Really, when in doubt, keep your
Okay.
mouth shut. You know what I'm saying? But I believe that I've made some steps in those directions. You have to ask the people around me how they feel about it, and they may feel that it's not the case. Um, but the idea that Hasidus creates Baalei Midas Tevis, that the study and the life of Hasidus creates people with a refined character. I know it's true. I understand how it's true. But it's not true because you read a lot of books. It's true because you take what the books say very personally and you go through the steps of self-refinement. And I'm very far from finished. I mean, I'm a baby in those areas. I'm telling you the truth.
Wow. Does it give one an awareness of God and God running the world in a way that you don't ask questions or you
Well,
accept?
the God aspect for me is simpler than the human aspect for me.
I mean, you said before that you didn't ask, questions about God being good and doing this to you.
Never crossed my mind. It is true. You see, but I don't know it's from the Chassidus. It's from my home. It's
Hmm.
from my parents. It's from my grandparents. Um, you know,
Is
should
there a problem with someone asking that?
I think, you know, the answer to that question is, does it make a difference if it's a problem or not? If it's your reality, it's your reality. I
Hmm.
just feel like it's unfortunate. I feel like when we keep score with God, we're missing who God. We're just missing the point about what our relationship with God is. The definition of God being good means literally He's good,
Well, don't
but
we
He's
ask
very
that God
He's
do?
very complicated. It's so beyond our
Right.
fathoming. I'm just using. I mentioned before the idea of death. Everybody dies. Does that make God
Hmm.
bad? It's
Hmm.
part of the way of the world. Our role in our relationship with God is really to exploit God. And you don't exploit God by keeping score. You exploit God by taking advantage of the fact that He's present in our lives. In other words, I tell this to my students all the time, the greatest gift God gives us is the gift of God. It's not the goodness of God. It's not the cookies He sends us. It's the sense of His presence. I think a person without faith lives in a very cold world. And it's a negative, or it's a very frightening world. A person with faith lives in a very warm world. It's not a simple world. And the definition of good is not as simplistic as we make it. Good means I have a lot
Hmm.
of money, and bad means I have no money. Good means that I get along with my wife, and bad means I don't get along with my wife. Good means that all my children are healthy and being exactly the way I think they should be, and bad means that they should be different. That's just not true.
Hmm.
That's the script that we write. It's not true. You have to, when people look back at their lives as they get older and wiser and humbler, they begin to understand from a much deeper perspective the very definition of what it means that God is good. And His goodness is in the most painful moments in our life.
Hmm.
And the greatest expression of that goodness is the fact that He's present. It's odd because a lot of people would feel differently than I do. I have a pretty good relationship with it. We're good.
No,
Um,
it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, but on the other hand, we also ask that things should be good in the way that we see it.
right,
Tov hanira v'nigla, in
correct.
a revealed sense of good. So what does that mean?
So it means exactly what it says. But then
So
the way
why?
God delivers that
Mm,
is not just His choice, it's His wisdom. In other words, it's not just, I'm going to be good to you on this issue, or I'm not going to be good to you on this issue. It's He sees all the pieces of the puzzle. And the puzzle is so complex that if we knew what God knows, we'd go out of our minds, to be very candid. We would appreciate that the way it is the way it's supposed to be.
mhm,
And being able to accept that, it's not only about acceptance, it's about living. And I think that this is a significant part of the goodness of God, accepting the world as it is. And I just want to repeat, it's extremely critical for people to appreciate that being a believer does not entitle a person to work one drop less hard than someone who's not a believer. It's just not acceptable to God that we say, okay, I'm a religious person, so I'm going to sit and wait, fold my hands. That that's the most ungodly thing a person can do, because God created us for work. Anybody who knows that Eben knows that his I'm looking for the right word, his intolerance of retirement, his refusal to accept this notion of a person stopping to work. I never told people in public videos, I never heard of the person stopping to live, because man was created to work. You don't only work because you need to, you work because your definition is work. And that's important. God is present in our lives in the areas where we invest, not where we wait for him to give us.
So should we be asking for us to just accept God's will rather than make God's will in a way that is revealed goodness for us?
Right. So this is the question that's on everybody's minds. And I would
Mhm.
like people to visit my website and check out my section on faith. I have talks on this subject. Um, I'm going to give you my perspective, and it's a little bit different than perhaps what the mainstream is. To me, it's very important. And again, I will say again that this is not so much from my learning as it is from my home and from the influence of my parents and my grandparents, who in the areas of faith played a very, very important role in my life. My mother's parents, who were not Lubavitchers, they were not, they're American Jews,
Hmm.
and their faith, and I watched them go through the worst kind of suffering, is a lesson to all of us, of just living and just letting things be and not trying to help God do his job. So I want to tell you my angle. There are two separate things here, and I'm going to use the Hebrew words. One is emunah, one is faith, and the other is betachan, which is trust.
Mhm.
They are frequently confused. They're frequently used interchangeably, and they're distinctly different things. Emunah, faith, is like breathing air. Trust is like eating food or drinking water. The difference is faith is a baseline. You can't live without breathing. A religious person lives in God's world, period. And God is present. You learn that in your home. You learn that in your childhood. You learn that from your mother singing you a lullaby as she nursed you when you were 3 months old. And you have no recollection of it, but it's in your soul, it's in your subconscious, it's in your core, that Hashem is here. God Almighty is present. And that has to be in our bones. And it needs to be simple, not complex, and not analyzed, not questioned. And the reason it shouldn't be analyzed, the reason it shouldn't be questioned, is not because we're not entitled to ask, but because when we ask, it means that there is a flaw in our faith. And to be very honest, if we have a problem with our faith, we have a problem with our mental health, with our spirit. It's very sad to have problems with God, because being unsure about the presence of God Almighty in our life puts us in this space of fear and uncertainty and a negative point of view, which is foundationally antithetical to what religion is, to what a relationship with God is. Now, that faith is not about God being good or bad, it's about him being present, which is the greatest thing, greatest gift that God gave us. I say this to my students all the time. I said that to you 5 minutes ago. The greatest gift God gave us is the gift of God, period.
Mhm.
Now, we go through all kinds of things in our lives. Some of them are wonderful, some of them are challenging. And when we face challenges, we've got two choices. We have many choices. You can accept them, you can pray that they can be changed, and you can aspire to what's called betachan, a level of trust, where you want to turn around the challenge into something overtly good. In Hebrew, that should be overtly good from our point of view, through the trust alone. This is an idea which is today very celebrated, that everybody is studying betachan, that everybody is studying this idea of, if you trust, it'll be good and overt and in a real way. I want you to know, when people study these texts and they have a problem with it, they call me.
Mhm.
Um, I feel that amongst the many ills of our time, there are many people who have a betachan relationship with God without a foundation of emunah. I'm going to say it again in English. People are
Mm.
trying to make deals with God, and they have a problem with His ever presence. It's in the wrong order. It's in the
Mm.
wrong order, and it makes our religion, it makes a relationship with God, which is almost a business arrangement, and that's not religion. It's not faith. It's unhealthy, and it's unsustainable, and it's unwholesome, and it's not Judaism. It never was, and it is never will be. The first thing is I live in God's world. Now, within that parameter, in that framework, I can have all kinds of relationships. I can pray. I can accept. I can insist that it's going to be good. And the Rebbe talks about this in his talks, which is based directly on the Shara B'Tachan from Rabbeinu Bachya, where positive trusting that it's going to be good creates a good outcome. But you see, you must understand what that means. Trusting that it'll be good, that it's a good outcome means that you're so aware of the infinity of God that it's so clear to you that for God to change nature is not a big deal. And you truly believe it. You don't just say it. You truly trust that God has so much power that He can do whatever He wishes. And if He wanted it to be overtly good, it would be overtly good. Your trust can affect the change in your environment. But it's not, I'll think good and you'll change the world. That's not the way this operates. You'll believe good. You'll be certain of the good in your soul. And I think the challenge of that is lost on people. I think people think it's a game. You're
Mm.
negotiating with God. I'll think positive for five
Mhm.
minutes. And the foundation of it is one of them. And you wrote on your list of questions, what's the biggest problem facing our generation?
Mhm.
I think the answer to that question is we don't know how to live normal, push it normal, religious lives. The simplest things are so confusing for us. And the simplest of the simple is faith. I live in God. I live in God's world. It's so simple and it's so axiomatic. It's so foundational to a religious Jew, to a human being, really. And it's in that framework that we have a relationship with God. And that framework, forgive me for using this word, that we negotiate with God. But that never changes. And when we have a problem with that, then it's sorry. It's not healthy.
Hmm. What if someone's listening to this and thinking that they don't have that foundational belief in God? What should they do?
I think they should think about it. And I think they shouldn't feel criticized by me. I think they shouldn't feel like I'm saying that they're damaged goods. But I think it's so important for them to remedy this. If a person was raised in Russia, if you're an American and you were raised in a very secular home, there's an enormous amount of God in the air we breathe in the United States. Most Americans believe in God. How imminent God is and how much power God has, that can be debated. But if you were raised in the Soviet Union, Stalin, Yamach Shmei, very successfully killed God. So people who come from the former Soviet Union, I think they may have a real problem with simple faith because it's been stolen from them. And to relearn that is so deep, it's so exhaustive. But you must do it. You must, because it's the beginning of religion. It's the beginning of being a healthy human being, is living in God's world. I think questions, just asking questions, just needing to understand everything can dampen, can diminish that simple faith, which is why sometimes you got to leave stuff alone.
Mm.
I say to people all the time, religion doesn't have a problem with asking questions. They just feel that it's too expensive. It's too costly to have to prove everything. It's too costly to have to explain everything because my relationship with God is simply more important. And what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? Do me a favor. They're good questions. Leave them. Living life as a believer, as someone who lives in God's world, it's so much more important than having all the questions answered. That insisting that until I answer all the questions, I can't afford to allow myself to be a believer is literally cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're hurting yourself in a
Well,
way that's,
someone could argue that you're cutting yourself off by not asking those questions if those questions are plaguing you and you're not addressing them and you're just ignoring them.
well, you can't ignore them. It's impossible to ignore them. It's just not possible. It's unfortunate that I will tell you a little story. Okay, it's one of the most important stories in my life. I had an aunt. My mother had a sister who's now deceased, whose husband passed away at the age of 39 and left her with 3 babies who are now grown. And it was 1987. I was 21 years old. And when I was 21, I was a know-it-all. I knew everything. I've gotten dumber over time.
Like all of us.
That's exactly right. And my grandparents, her father and mother, were 2 different weddings. And my father, I went along with my father to inform my grandfather of what had happened. And my uncle went to see his mother, my mother's sister, brothers like his own, should live and be well, to tell his mother. It was a tragedy. It's an unimaginable tragedy. It's indescribable. So he went to see my grandfather. So we walked into a wedding hall. He was eating chicken. And I had enough seichel to know that I should keep my mouth shut. Anyway, my grandfather sees us, and he understood that we didn't come to find out how the chicken tasted. So he put his food down, he wiped his fingers, and we walked out of the hall. And I learned so much from the exchange between my father, and my grandfather, all of us, Shalom. I can't tell you. They walked out into a private room, and my father said to his father-in-law, whom he loved and respected so much, one word, Dove. That was my uncle's name, Dove. And my grandfather didn't say a word. He simply took his hand and he ran it vertically across like this here, horizontally across. And my father's response was the same. And the question that was being asked was, is it over? And the answer that was given was, it's over. And then my grandfather said in Yiddish, Ich hab nicht keine Kashes. I have no questions. Now, my grandfather was born in America, so he didn't suffer like my father suffered. But my grandfather went through the Depression. He literally knew hunger in America. He once told me, you don't know how it feels to come home from school and find your furniture on the sidewalk. So I asked him if it ever happened to his family, and he said no, but it happened to many of my friends. So he had a lot of wisdom. And he was very American. He hated shtick. He hated pretenses. He hated when things were made decorated and exaggerated. He was a simple man. But he had very deep values, incredibly deep values. And those words, I have no questions, resonate in my mind. They're so important to me because that's how he lived his whole life. That's not how he dealt with that tragedy. You can't get religious at such moments. You either have it or you don't have it. And he had it from his mother. His father would lose his job every Friday because he wouldn't come to work on Shabbos. And he'd come home to his wife and say to his wife, my grandmother, whom I never knew, Sima, I was fired. And she would shout across the house, God Almighty provided until now, and he will continue to provide. A lot of American women didn't say that to their husbands. They would say, go to work tomorrow, don't come home. And that's how he grew up. And those were his values. And they were not intellectual. They were from his neshama, they're from his soul. And that's how it's supposed to be. And if you think about it, there's a religious component to it, and there's a psychological component to it. A person who lives in a world without God, forgive me for my candor, is ill. Not having God is not only costly because you can't be religious, because your whole life is fear. Your whole life is survival. Animals survive. Human beings live. But human beings live because we were created in the image of God. And if you lose touch with that sense and that presence, your life becomes sick. Even if you don't practice religion. There are people who they don't practice mitzvahs, they don't do the rituals, but they live in God's world. There's a certain peace, a real meaningful peace that comes from that. That's not naive. It's just the truth. And we should all afford ourselves that. Now, with the way we're supposed to raise our children is we're supposed to give them these values when they're little babies. It's supposed to be so intuitive. It's supposed to be so instinctive. It's supposed to be in their subconscious. If a person didn't get that, they have to figure out how to get it for themselves, and most importantly, how to inspire that in their children. It's probably one of the greatest challenges a human being can experience. If God is a natural to you, it is a series of questions and answers. It is a scorecard. It is keeping track. And it's unnatural. It's from a religious perspective and even from a psychological perspective. It's not how human beings are supposed to live. And you need to admit that you have a problem, and then you have to struggle to solve it. And it really comes down to tamam tiyeh meshem alekecha, which means you should be simple with God, not sophisticated. Our relationship with God is supposed to be like we're little children and He's our Father, and that's the end of it. It's not easy to do. I can't imagine having to deal with that struggle. But faith is the greatest thing we have. And it's in that framework that we have more precise relationships with God, such as betachon, such as prayer, such as acceptance. But I think that's the foundation. I believe that's the foundation. I know that that's the foundation.
Wow. Rabbi Paltiel, it's fascinating, just fascinating talking to you. I could continue for a long time, but our time is really running out. I just want to ask you one last question. Should someone study Chassidus? Is it for everybody? What if somebody is not such a theoretical thinker, but they're more tangible? They're not so deep or intuitive in their ways of understanding. Is it still a study that they should be studying?
The Baal Shem Tov said and wrote in a published letter that Mashiach told him that Mashiach's coming depends on people studying Chassidus. So I think it's kind of important for everybody. The question is which Chassidus and in what way? I'm a Chabadnik. I tell my girls in school, born, bred, and brainwashed. So it's the joke. This is my whole world, and I'm not eclectic. I'm not an Asher. I'm not one of those people who needs to know everybody's way of life. Chassidus is for everybody, but not everybody will be intuitively appreciative of it. You need a certain kind of mind. You need to be an abstract thinker. You need to be spiritual to appreciate the more complicated Hasidic discussions that are really very scholarly. But Tanya speaks to everybody. Tanya speaks to everybody. Tanya is one of those books that has inherent magic. You study the Tanya and it talks about whatever it discusses, but it changes you. And it changes you in ways that are not consistent with the material that you're reading necessarily. It makes God very real. It makes religion, makes Torah mitzvahs, practicing Judaism very real. And in our generation, I would add that the Rebbe's talks, the Likkutei Sichos, were written by the Rebbe and edited by the Rebbe and published by the Rebbe to present Hasidus in a language that has an appeal to people who are not that spiritual. It's presented that way. And those are the two things that I would advise people who don't find Hasidus intuitively meaningful, is to study Tanya and to study the Rebbe's talks, especially the early volumes of the Rebbe's edited Sichos, where he's speaking about the most fundamental ideas. He's speaking about life. And Hasidus informs everybody. It does. And at the base of Hasidus is a special kind of faith. At the base of Hasidus is a special kind of sense of the immanence of God, the presence of God. And that inspires joy and humility, which are wonderful gifts for every person to have. So the foundational messages of Hasidus teach us how to be healthy people. And it's absolutely for everybody, but you don't necessarily have to learn the most esoteric and Kabbalistic texts. That you have to have time and mind and curiosity for. And I would agree that not everybody has those opportunities. When you're a boy or a girl in yeshiva, you have much time. And if we would only not waste it when we have it, if we only were as wise as we are now when we were 17, we'd all be geniuses.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for joining us,
Of
Rabbi
course.
Paltiel. You gave such good insights and so many things, so much food for thought to think about. And I just wish you continued success in continuing to disseminate your teachings, and many more people should continue to learn from it
I thank you
and from
very
you and
much.
your
I thank
wisdom.
you very much. I thank you for the opportunity and for the publicity. If you like
Thank
what you
you.
heard, please visit Inside Hasidus. There's a menu, and go scroll down the menu and decide what you like. Okay, good night.
Thank,
Okay, God
thank
bless.
you. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Wow, that was quite an interview with Rabbi Yossi Paltiel. I found it really fascinating. I'm wondering what you felt about it. It was really deep. So many ideas were discussed. I'm going to give you a little secret that this discussion had to take place late at night because Rabbi Paltiel is so busy throughout the day and afternoon and morning and early evening doing his teachings. So we started it quite late and honestly, I wasn't sure how I would handle it so late at night, but I found the ideas that he spoke about so fascinating that it was really intriguing. I loved how he expressed the ideas of faith and the ideas of that simple faith, and how it was just something so intuitive to what he understood. I really appreciated different parts of how he explained Chassidus and the ways that it makes us more aware of God's presence in our world, and how that really brings joy and humility. And the fact that just God is here with us and in our suffering and in our joyous times and in every moment is really the gift. It's not the gift of having the good times or the successes or the positivity, but it's just even having him in our life, that itself is a gift. I thought that was a really deep statement that we could really think about and meditate on, because as he expressed, someone who does not live with faith, that simple faith, is leading a very unwell life, a life full of just survival, and how that life of survival is not what a human being is meant to be. I thought that was also a very profound teaching. I also really enjoyed how he expressed his difficult time, how the challenge that he and his wife went through, and how they looked at it and dealt with it. And I found it very interesting how he said as well that it's usually the suffering of others that we can't understand. But when we're going through the suffering ourselves, it's something that we're so busy with just dealing with, and perhaps feeling God holding us up and carrying us, that we don't have time for those questions. And that was a very interesting point as well. I'm wondering which part of this interview resonated with you. It was quite deep, and it was quite a lot to absorb and quite a lot to digest. I'm wondering which part you enjoyed. If you enjoyed it, what you took from it, what's your takeaway? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. I hope that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary to get these podcasts, these interviews straight to your email, straight to your inbox. And we are also available on all podcast platforms. If you're on the go, you could take us with you. And most of all, I want to just thank you all for listening and being part of this extraordinary community. Thank you.